What is up guys, this is Mr. Ninja Boy and today we're going to be continuing the Photoshop tutorial series, taking off where we left off last time as we went through many of the essentials and basics you must learn before continuing on to more advanced techniques which we will be getting into today. If you haven't watched the first video in this series, which covers all the basics as I mentioned, I highly recommend that you watch that video first, which can be found on my channel under the Photoshop tutorial series playlist, and also in the link I provide in the description below. This has been a very highly requested video and series that I continue after the amazing support I received upon releasing the first tutorial, so I am here today to continue this with part 2, covering pretty cool stuff, which includes powerful tools, which we are going to be learning, some awesome stuff like making objects from photos disappear, and more that we will dive into later. And also we're going to be covering layer masks, lighting effects, filters, and yeah, that's going to be basically what we will be covering and all the elements in this tutorial today in this second tutorial on the Photoshop tutorial series. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so we're going to get started with this tutorial by learning how to utilize a lot of the very powerful tools that are included in Photoshop that will really come in handy when doing photo manipulation, photo editing, stuff of that nature. So we're going to get started by learning a skill that basically includes removing an object from an image and basically sampling parts of the background of an image and painting over it to have the illusion of it being removed from the image itself. In this case, we're going to be removing the Eiffel Tower from this image of the Eiffel Tower. And if you guys want to edit the exact same photo we're going to be using and all the photos that we're going to be using in this tutorial, in this video, if you want to follow along, there will be a link in the description below with a download to basically a resource package I made for you guys with all the images and other resources we're going to be using, like the lighting effects and whatnot in this video. Alright, so we're going to get started by actually making a selection of this tower, so we don't really mess with anything else in the background and we just focus on this, removing this, and this basically applies to anything else if you want to be removing from an image itself. So basically what we're doing is selecting the object, isolating the object that we're going to be removing. So let's zoom in a bit so we can get a little more precise, and we can go over here to select the pen tool or press P for the shortcut. So we're going to be using the pen tool to actually make the selection, but before we do that, we're actually going to create a new layer by pressing that. And once we have the new layer, we can start by making the selection. So we're going to do that by starting around here as the reference point. We'll make the selection of, basically what we're doing is making the selection of the silhouette of the Eiffel Tower. We don't really have to go too precise, especially here where the background is quite simple. We just have like the sky and the clouds and whatnot. So we're just going to make the selection here. We do not have to make the selection right onto the object itself, but with that being said, if you are going to be doing like professional work and whatnot, where there's more detail involved, especially if it's an image that has more details in the background, you do want to go more detailed than this. But for the tutorial's sake, to save time, we aren't going to go too detailed. I just want to give you guys the general idea on how to actually do this, how to achieve this effect that we're trying to achieve. So once we go down here, we are actually going to go a little more detailed, where we have all these buildings and the hedges, a little more stuff going on in the background. So we are going to follow like the geometry of these hedges, which is like pretty cubic, so it's quite straightforward. We don't even have to make a lot of like curvature. But here we do, where we have this little like semicircle dome type of thing at the bottom of the Eiffel Tower, so we're just going to do that. Alright, so that looks about right. Now we're going to continue making the selection around these little details, this bush here and the hedge. So once we do that, we can close off the selection by selecting the reference point we started at, and bam, as you guys can see, we have the Eiffel Tower fully selected. And this is basically what we're going to be messing with and using the background to sample to paint over this little selection that we made. So we're going to right click here and we are going to make selection, and for feather radius, put it at 0.1 pixels, anti-alias on, and yeah, that looks about right. So let's just click OK, and as you guys can see, we have a little selection here. So we're going to get started with actually painting over this and making it basically invisible to like it. We're basically going to blend it into the background, painting over it. And you guys will see what I mean right now. So we're going to go over here to this tool called the Clone Stamp tool. We're going to click on that, and we're going to get started with sampling a part of the background and painting over it. We're going to start with this middle section where it's just a clear sky, and we're going to click Alt and click on this area. Once we have that sampled, we're going to move over here and start painting over it. And as you guys can see, basically what it's doing is it's selecting this area and painting over this to basically remove this object and use the background as a reference to do so. So we're going to keep on doing that sort of idea by selecting parts of the image and referencing it by clicking Alt to sample it is actually the right word to use. So we're basically just sampling and painting over parts of the image. So there we go. And as you guys can see, that's really achieving the sort of effect we're trying to get. We're going to start down here with it's because this is like a harder part of the image to do with all these little details. But again, this is just a tutorial, so we are not going to go too detailed with this. But we're just gonna try to achieve the effect, and I'm just gonna show you guys the general idea of this and how to do it. So once you have the idea down, you know how to actually you know, once you got the hang of this, you can really do this with any type of photo, and it'll be a lot easier. So this is just basically just practicing the skill. Everything in this video is just basically practicing these skills. So when you do want to actually do some serious work, you know how to achieve these effects. Now we're going to move over to the upper section, and again we're just going to select, and if you guys want to make the brush bigger or smaller, we can hold down Alt and then hold down the right mouse button and just click and drag in and out to make the size smaller or bigger as you guys desire. For the smaller little details, when you go in closer, you do want the brush to be smaller, of course, and vice versa. When you have like a bigger area like this, you really wouldn't mind having a bigger brush size. That wouldn't really affect anything. So here we are going to add a little detail with the clouds by sampling a part of like the cloud itself and using the brush over this area. So we can sample this kind of area and paint over this essentially. So this is a very simple skill, I mean a very simple tool to use and a very powerful skill to have up your sleeve. I would say it's a very essential thing to learn in Photoshop, very easy to use and also very powerful. So we're just trying to achieve the most realistic effect we can here. And I think that does not look too bad. We can just smooth this out by sampling parts that are closer to this. And I think that does not look too bad at all. Now let's zoom out of the image itself to see what we achieved. We can click on this and oh, well, all right, let's not move the layer itself. And bam, as you guys can see, we did remove the Eiffel Tower itself, but you guys can see like a little outline of it, especially down here at the bottom. Here, I did not even bother to transfer over the buildings because that will take a lot more time. But this is just the general idea. This is how to do it. I'm sharing you guys, you know, how to use these tools, and you guys can utilize it and use your creative ability to really achieve the most realistic possible effect with this. All right, so now we're going to be going over how to use another pretty important tool and very easy to use, which is called the blur tool. And this is actually going to be useful here in this case to actually blend in these lines. As you guys can see, it looks pretty like choppy. Like you can really see the contrast, the difference as to where we actually faded in painted over the Eiffel Tower. You can still sort of see the silhouette of the Eiffel Tower, and we can sort of blend that in using the blur tool, which is very simple to use, as I said. So the blur tool is found here. It's this raindrop looking icon, and we're actually gonna just click on that and zoom into the image where we can sort of see these lines here of the outline. So first of all, when we want to blend two images, these are two separate layers. This is a layer itself where we actually edited painted into the the Eiffel Tower. What we're gonna do is actually merge these two layers, make them one image. So we're gonna click on the layer 1, which is this layer on top, and then the tower itself, the actual base image. Click on that and hold shift so you can select both. Right click, and we're gonna merge layers. So once we've merged layers, we can now use the blur tool. So we go back here, click on that, and we can start by just clicking and dragging. And as you guys can see, what it's doing is basically using a type of blur, like a Gaussian blur, something like that, to essentially blend this in and use blur in very specific areas that you select. You can do like blur in the whole image itself using filters, which we will be going over in this tutorial as well later. But for now, this is very selective type of blur where you can really select and you know, specify where exactly you want the blur to be. So we're just gonna blend this in using the blur, click and drag, and basically just make this look a lot nicer by blending it in using blur. So as you guys can see, when you actually zoom into the image and start blurring, it does look a lot better. This will of course look better if you have like a lot of details to begin with, and it's very like if the image goes really well in the first place, you made the clouds, all the shapes go together well, plus use the blur tool on top, this is really the way to do it. And it'll look that much nicer. So as you guys can see, we can even like blur the edges of these hedges, make it blend into the image a lot nicer. And yeah, as you guys can see, now if we zoom out back to 100%, that looks a lot nicer than it did before. All right, so now we're gonna go over a couple more tools that are quite essential to know while using Photoshop. And the first one is called the brush tool. Now we're gonna go to the brush tool by clicking on this icon here, which is a brush, and now we are in the brush tool. So essentially what I did first was I created a new document by going to File, New, and then under the dimensions 1920 by 1080. Doesn't really matter, just make a new document and create a new layer. So once we have a new layer here, we are going to the brush tool as I showed you guys, and once we click on that, essentially what the brush tool is, it gives us the freedom to select different styles of brushes and you know, under different settings and whatnot. And by doing so, we have the freedom to essentially just paint onto this canvas, so to speak. And we can really do a lot with the brush tool. Let's say we can select like one of the first one is a quite simple brush, which is it's just basically a straight. It doesn't really have any detailing, like some of these brushes have a lot of like rough edges, like here as you can see. The first brush is quite simple, and the first and second are actually different like variations. The second is essentially the same one as the first one with full hardness. So what hardness does is, if we're at 0 hardness, if you can see there on the edges, you can really see a little like type of blur. But if we bump up the hardness a bit, let's say we go like around 50%, you can see a little more detail. It looks a lot more crisp around the edges. One more thing you guys might want to know while using the brush tool, if you guys want to do like a straight line, you can hold down shift, and in the direction that you want to paint in, you can connect lines and do, like, let's say if you want a diagonal straight line here, you just hold down shift and click. So you can basically do straight lines. If you start here and you click there and hold down shift, you can do a straight line there. So if you travel over here again, you can go to sizes, and you can adjust the size. Obviously it'll make the brush bigger, and there's a lot of different variations built in brushes onto Photoshop. You can also buy brushes, presets, install new brushes and whatnot, and create your own. And yeah, this is just a very oh, this is actually quite interesting. A leaf type of brush. See, like, brushes are something more used in like graphic design type of work, more so than photo editing. But this is a very nice thing to know how to use. And if you have an artistic ability, if you have a you know, a really creative side to you, I guess, this will really come in handy, and you'll have a lot of fun using the brush tool. Alright, so the last tool that we're going to go over in this tutorial is going to be the gradient tool. And the gradient tool is very useful for creating nice, abstract, sort of simplistic backgrounds and stuff like that. This will be useful for creating like graphics, like if you want to create like a header, a thumbnail, stuff like that. This is going to be a very useful tool to know how to use. And it's actually quite simple. So we're gonna just hide this this layer where we created where we just mess around with the brushes and whatnot, and I just created a new layer. So I'll just do that by just clicking on that, create a new layer, and on this layer now we're gonna go over to here and this click on this, which is going to put us into the or we're going to be using the gradient tool by clicking on that. So just click on that, and basically what the gradient tool is, we can select a preset from one of these. Let's say we want a black and white sort of gradient where like we want a background with the top left darker, like a black, fading into a white. So we can click on that, press OK. And we can start by selecting here, clicking and dragging to across the image. And as you guys can see here, we created a nice gradient type of background with the black starting here and the white traveling like down here. So it's like a nice fade. And if we want to do it the other way, we start down here and click and drag diagonally across there. And as you guys can see, we did the same effect but reversed. Now let's say we want to do a different, we can use even alpha channels, like different gradients that have transparency to it. Let's say this one, we can click on that, start here, click and drag, and as you guys can see, we made some lines. We can do it on a smaller scale. As you guys can see if we do that. Now let's say we wanted to do different colors, everything else. They're just presets that are built in. We can let's say we want like an orange, nice like popping background, click on that and then go back to here, click and drag, and as you guys can see, it's quite simple to do gradient backgrounds. You guys can just mess around with this and you know, really try to figure out what the best sort of preset and the best effect that you want to achieve using this. You can do it up and down, diagonally, really it's up to you. So that's the last tool that we are going over in this tutorial. Alright, so now we're going to be going over the concepts of using layer masks in Photoshop. Now layer masks are a very important way to manage your work in Photoshop and projects because it's like almost like a fail-proof, non-destructive way of doing things. And you'll get exactly what I mean when we dive deep into this. So basically what I did here was this sort of abstract type of design that I had in mind for like sort of like a poster for this wallpaper of this car. And it's just a very simple thing I just did quickly with brushes and whatnot. But it's just to showcase what we're going to be doing with layers not layers, rather layer masks in Photoshop right now. So let's actually hide this. And first of all, I'm going to show you guys the wrong way of doing this first by not using layer masks. And why it's like negative to do that, and the positives of using layer masks. So I'll be talking about that now. So first of all, let's create a new layer as usual. We have a new layer here, and again, this image is included in the resource package that is included as a link down below in the description. So if you want to edit this exact same photo, but you can really do this to anything. I'm just using this as an example. So now we go to the brush tool, and we're just gonna make a bunch of scribbles here. So until we have something like a desirable design, I think that looks pretty cool. So from here, what we could do without layer masks is just go to the eraser tool to sort of get that effect I just showed you guys, and try to cut out the car and get the car cut out from the scribbles. So once we've done that, as you guys can see, that looks pretty cool. But let's say we wanted to recover a part of the scribble and actually fill it back in. Now what we would have to do by using just the eraser tool and not using layer masks is we would have to go edit, undo, eraser until, let's say we want this part filled back in. We'd have to go step backward and then actually revert it to the original. Where we'd lose all the progress everywhere else and actually have to redo it, so we'd have to get it how we want there. Now, using layer masks, we can avoid this problem. So let's actually just delete this layer and create a new one. So let's just create a new layer and actually start making the paintbrushes again, the scribbles or whatever you want to call it. So let's just do that. That looks pretty cool. All right, maybe even do like little smaller brush strokes to add to it, make it more detailed. All right, that's pretty cool. Now from here, again, or not again, actually, we're not going to use the eraser tool this time. What we are going to do is click on here, click here, and this is what this is going to do is add a layer mask. Oops, I accidentally added two. Let's actually just add one. So we click here, and what that does is add a layer mask. So if we wanted to erase some of the white bits to cut out the car, we go here, and this is basically switching between alpha and non-alpha channels. Alpha channels meaning transparent. So when it's on black, black always means that it's going to be transparent. That's what is erasing basically. So when it's on black, we can click this little arrow thing to switch between the two. So when it's on black, basically what we're doing is erasing. So let's just erase to cut out the car. So do like a quick job to erase, because I'm going to show you guys how to fill stuff back in using the channels. So let's say that looks pretty good. All right, now let's say we wanted to fill some parts in back here. You can't really do that just using the eraser tool, anything without alpha channels. But the nice thing with alpha channels here is if we switch back to the white, we can fill stuff back in. Just like that. And again, let's say we mess up there, we can switch back to the alpha channel and also erase that. So again, this is a very non-destructive way of doing things in Photoshop. And once you get the hang of alpha channels, there's so much things you can do with it. And this is just the concept of it. And it's just a very important way to manage your work in Photoshop. And I thought it would be really important to show you guys in this tutorial. Using alpha channels. So the rest of the image, all I did was essentially just add different colors. I'll show you guys how to actually change the colors of the brush. Oh, first of all, before we do that, if you guys want to see the actual channel itself, you can hold down Alt and then click on that, and that'll actually show the channel itself. The black is always the transparent, as I said before, and the white is the non-transparent. See, like I didn't even notice there was a non-transparent part here actually covering the car until I went to here, because there's glare on the car itself. So this is actually a very important thing for when you're doing your edits. As you can see there, just one thing I just noticed from just switching between those two different views. So we can actually cover that area by we're already on the alpha channel and just erasing there. So yeah, now let's say we want to change the color of the brush. We click on this, not the alpha channel itself, but actually the brush, and we go to image adjustments, and then we can go to color, or let's just go to hue and saturation, and we click on colorize, and let's put down the lightness a bit so we can see the color, and we can change the hue from here. So what I did was I went to like a little kind of bluish tint, and I bumped up saturation, and yeah, that's sort of like the effect I got. And by doing so, I also added different brush strokes and whatnot, and added the text. This text sort of design I showed you guys how to do in like this basics tutorial. Quite simple, just using the effects panel and whatnot. So yeah, that's just the very basics of using layer masks in Photoshop, and I might dive deeper into using layer masks later on in part 3 of this tutorial series. Alright, so now we're going to be covering the very basics of lighting. Now, I'm not going to go too in-depth in lighting, because I can make a whole video in itself about lighting, creating an atmosphere, trying to achieve realistic lighting, light rays, light beams, stuff like that. I can really create a lengthy tutorial in itself about lighting, and if you guys want me to do that, I would be more than happy to. Please let me know. But I'm just going to give you guys the very basics of lighting, how you guys can achieve simple light rays and lens flares, stuff like that. And yeah, ambient lighting, like soft lighting, stuff like that. And we're actually also going to be using this image to do all the edits and the testing and whatnot, and showing you guys the examples of what type of lighting we're going to be doing today. So we're going to get started by making a sort of soft lighting from this right corner here, because as you guys can see, this image is already edited a bit with the color correction and whatnot, and there is soft lighting here, but we're going to add to that and make this a little brighter, and we can actually add colors to it. So the first method of adding lighting we're going to actually use is actually using the brush tool. weirdly enough. We're going to go to the brush tool again, as we already went over in this tutorial. So go to the brush tool and actually select the first brush and hardness all the way down to 0. We want to bump up the size to something like around 500. That should be good. And we're just going to start painting here. Actually, before we do that, let's create a new layer. Forgot to do that. That's very important, of course. So on this new layer, let's start painting and making the sort of like, it's not really a ray in this case, it's sort of like a soft ambient light that's just going to be seeping through from this corner. So as you guys can see there right now, what it is basically just this crazy light that's just overpowering the car. We can't really see the end of the car there. And what we're going to do with this is mess around with the effects panel and actually edit the light using that. It's not much of a light as of right now, but let's say we reduce the opacity. You can start to see where this is going. Now this is without any opacity, so this is the original image. When we bump that a bit up, like even like the slightest amount, you could start to see where we can take this very simple effect we just did here. So let's say we go like around 20% opacity, we can do a color overlay. And then when we do color overlay, we can actually also edit the color itself, maybe go for like an orangish hue. And as you guys can see, that that adds a pretty nice effect to that. Can even just experiment with the colors, you know, even if we go with a blue and then do the same effects we did with the brush strokes that we did before, you can achieve something pretty nice with this. So we can also mess around with opacity. Now if you're doing this, you don't want to go too high opacity because that looks pretty weird now, as you guys can see. So if we go down to opacity like around I don't know, like 30, from I'd say 15 to 30%, it should be good. And another method we could use is use the gradient overlay. And with this, we could go with this over here. And as you guys can see, this adds a nice orangish tint. And what we can do is at the extreme end to the left here, we double click that and we add a white to that. So basically what this is, it's an orange that progressively turns into like a lighter hue of orange, like, and then into like a yellow that eventually fades into white. So that is pretty cool. And when we press OK, what we can do is also edit the angle. So we'd have it angled down here where the white would be here, and then goes darker as it goes up. And we can also now go back to the blending options, make the color, make it the opacity higher. And as you guys can see, when we go obviously too high, it's not going to look too good. But if we go something like that, and then what we can do is actually move it, so we can have it something like here. As you guys can see, that's a pretty cool effect we achieved from just simply using the brush tool. A lot of people don't really actually use this, but I tend to really use this in like thumbnails and stuff. See, as you guys can see, that's a pretty cool effect. Now this is more for like a graphic effect, more so than actually creating realistic lighting. That's why I mentioned thumbnails, because I always like to do gradients and whatnot in thumbnails and like headers, stuff like that, banners. This is a very nice effect to add, and it does add the sense of lighting, but not necessarily the traditional type of lighting, if you know what I mean. But yeah, this is the first method I was going to show you guys how to do lighting, a very simple one. Now I'm also gonna show you guys how to use images you can find from the internet, and I also included a couple lens flares and different lighting you can use inside of your projects in the resource package that I included down below. And I'm still actually creating that right now, but by the time this video is complete, the package will be complete. So far I only have one light ray, but of course there will be a couple more for you guys available. And so let's say you wanted to, first of all, I'll show you guys how to take an image from the internet, a lens flare, let's say, and put it into your project. And then I'll show you guys how to use a lens flare that is included inside, or a lighting preset that is included inside of my package for you guys. But first of all, let's go on Google and actually search for a lens flare or a light ray. So as you guys can see here, if we just search up light ray on Google Images, we have a lot of results. And let's say we wanted to use one of these light rays into our actual project. Let's find something pretty cool. That looks nice. That does not look too bad. That looks pretty cool. See, this is a lens flare. Now, if you wanted to add this into our project somewhere, let's say you wanted to add a flare on the top of the car here, how do we start doing that? Now, first of all, let's go to view image, right click on it, save image as, and then let's say save it as a flare. And now we go back to the project, we go file, place, and then find the file we just downloaded, and there we go. Now we have a huge blown up version of this. Let's actually size it down a bit. Go to one corner, hold down shift and size it down. That looks about right. Now once we're done sizing it, we can press the check mark once we're happy with the size and whatnot. And from here we can go to FX and then go to the effects panel when we're and then go to blending options. And once we're in blending options, from here we can actually go to the blend mode and go down to screen. Usually screen would do the job. And as you guys can see here, what it did is it cut out like the black background and it blended it into the background, where it's only the lens flare that actually shows. The black in the background is cut out essentially. So from here, as you guys can see, you can sort of see there's a difference here. There's a roughness where it's not really blended in correctly there. And it's basically just because it's a cut from there. It's like a cutout. It doesn't fully blend in the actual picture. So what we can do is go to the eraser tool and go on the image itself, click on it, rasterize it, and start blending it in from there. And as you can see that, it looks a lot better now. So now once we have the lens flare in there, we can place it wherever we want. Let's say we want to place it just right there. That looks pretty cool. So yeah, that's just basically, that's the basics of just adding a lens flare from the internet or any picture, an image that is a flare with a black background into your project. And that is a very effective way to use lighting in Photoshop and blend images and whatnot. And let's say you wanted to use one of the light rays included in the project, in the resource file, rather, that I include for you guys in the description down below. So far, there's only one light ray because, as I said, I will be completing it, and there will be a bunch more once the video's up. Right now, I just have one just to show you guys this. So let's say you want this in the project, you right-click on this. This is actually just that light ray, as you guys can see there. So let's say we right-click on that, we would duplicate layer and then go to the project. So right now we only have that one other project. It would just show the two other documents in this right now. It's the current one, which is Untitled 2, and the other one, which is the Porsche 918, and just duplicate it as light ray or whatever you want. You can rename it, and now it is in the project, as you guys can see here. So the light ray, we can also resize this. Just go Control T, and we can press shift on that and resize it however you want. And as you guys can see there, that's a pretty nice effect to add into your project. And that is literally just an image that is using a blend mode inside of Photoshop. So that is the very basics of lighting. I could also show you guys the manual way of doing lighting, the realistic lighting, like really in-depth lighting. I can make a whole separate tutorial, and please let me know if you want to see that, because I will be more than happy to do that. But yeah, that is it for lighting. Alright, so the last thing we're going to be looking at in this tutorial is going to be filters. Now, filters are usually something that is added towards the end of a project of whatever sort, where it's sort of like an effect that you want to achieve, from color grading to lighting effects, which actually ties into the lighting that we just did. There's different ways to actually achieve lighting effects using filters, and I'm actually going to show you guys that. So it sort of ties in with lighting. And also, yeah, there's just a lot of effects that you guys can use, and it's very straightforward. It's really not much. It's not much to teach. I'm just going to show you guys some of the filters I really like to use. So we're also going to just keep on using this image, and I just find this image is perfect for the types of the things that we're experimenting with, because the colors, everything, like the background, the blur, everything. So we're just going to keep on using this. And we're just going to ignore all the other layers that we worked with. You guys can delete it or keep it. It's up to you. I'm just going to click on the actual layer itself, the raw image. That's why I said usually this is done towards the end of a project, when you would merge all the layers into one image and then edit the image with the filters in the end. So first of all, I'm going to show you guys a couple filters. One I actually really like to use sometimes. Like, it really matters on what you want to do. The oil paint filter is a very interesting one. It makes your image look literally like an oil painting. So this is a very abstract one. It matters what you're trying to achieve. You can, of course, mess with the settings here. Like if you make the scale all the way up, it makes it less detailed. And then if you bring it down, there's a little more detail. And the bristle detail, that of course, this is the main thing with the detail. If you bring it all the way down, that adds a little less sharpness, essentially. Put the bristle detail, oh, actually other way around, bristle detail down. Oh yeah, that's what I meant. If you put the bristle detail down, you have less sharpness, and if you put it up, there's more roughness to it. And with the stylization, that more detailing stuff, basically. So it's a very interesting filter. I sometimes like to use it, mattering on what I'm doing. Now, what else is there? We can also do, there's different types of blurs you can do. There's a Gaussian blur, which is probably the most commonly used blur, mattering on what you're doing. Let's say you're blurring something out, adding text over it, that really works well. And you can also add, like, let's say a motion blur, which is essentially the blur that is in the background of this car. So basically how this image was done, it was taken, the original image did not, I'm pretty sure, did not have a background blur here. It was just a still normal image of this car. And you can basically do this using the masks that I showed you guys, for example, today. Just cut out the car and then make the car and the background a different image. And then what was done was a filter was used, like the motion blur filter, where the background is motion blurred and the car is in focus. So you can, of course, mess around with this with any type of project. There's a lot of blurs that you can use. And there's also distortions, like different displacement and stuff like that, like ripple distortion, for example. If we put that up, that looks pretty cool. That looks like it's underwater or something like that. And what else can we do? Let's see. There's also sharpen. So for example, if you have an image you want to sharpen, you can always sharpen that. This is a quite sharp image in itself, but like you can still see if we add a sharpen filter, it actually makes it that much sharper. It looks pretty nice now. So let's also add, there's different stylize effects, like find edges, which is interesting. And there's also diffuse, emboss, extrude is pretty cool. There's a lot of interesting effects. Basically, it's just up to you to experiment with them and see what fits best with your project. And I'm going to show you guys, the last thing I'm going to show you guys is how to do the lighting effects. So let's say you want to do lighting effects using filters. Go to render and then lighting effects. And from here, you can kind of do like a focus. Let's say you wanted a focal point on the car itself and everything else sort of blacked out. You can, let's decrease the hotspot a bit. So here we can actually make the background sort of blacked out. And then we can focus on, let's say, the front of the car here. And then we can put the colorize up to make the exposure a bit higher. The gloss, that you can really experiment with this. Metallic, put that up and down. Metallic all the way up, for me it looks best. Ambience, that also is sort of like exposure. Let's put that down. And as you guys can see, once you press OK, we have some pretty cool lighting effects going on here.
Alright, so that is going to conclude part 2 of learning the basics of Photoshop. We covered many things today in which I really feel will help you guys get the hang of the software and all its amazing capabilities. Now, if you made it all the way through the end, firstly, I hope this really helped you out, and if so, I'd really appreciate a like on the video, and let me know what you guys are looking forward to see in the next video in this series, if you have a specific request for topics to cover. With all that being said, this is where I sign out. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next one.